Romney's convention is fine. I mean, I think that there were a number of odd things he decided to do, like Clint Eastwood, but actually I think he came out of it in a pretty positive way. But Obama gets a bounce because, in part, Obama went last. The Democratic convention essentially stepped on the Republican convention. So you didn't really get to see if there was any bounce out of the convention for Romney, and you did see it for Obama. So what's happening is Obama's convention bounce is going up like this. Conservatives who were worried he doesn't get it, he's reverted to his innate cautiousness, they just don't get it, are trying not to panic, but they begin to panic. And the panic is a slightly lagging indicator to Obama's bounce. So Obama's bounce goes up like this, and amazingly enough, it begins to go back down. But here again, Republican panic, lagging indicator, still goes up for a little while, and right at that moment comes the 47% video and a complete and total Republican freakout, that everything about the Romney campaign is wrong, that his advisors are terrible, his strategy is wrong, and he's not big, he's running a tiny campaign and a small-minded campaign, and it's all a disaster. And really that's where I think we ended up yesterday. And it does reflect lingering doubts among conservatives and Republicans about the state of the Romney campaign. But the fact is, if you look at these polls, and I do think the polls are a reasonably good indicator of where we are at any given moment. I don't go nuts about the partisan, balance in a number of the polls. I think if you take 6, 8, 10, 12 polls, like Real Clear Politics does, average them together, gives you a pretty good idea of where we are at any given moment. Doesn't say where we're going to be on November 6th, but it tells you where we are now. And it's kind of where we were before. Romney's a little bit behind. Ohio is a matter of huge concern to him. But this is still a very close race. And the last thing a Romney campaign would need is a Republican establishment freaking out and running for the exits and saying they never really supported the guy in the first place right now, which is a little bit of what we're getting.
In regards to North Carolina, it's widely suggested that McCrory is going to win overwhelmingly by double digits. I do not believe that. I think it's going to tighten. I think it's going to be within 4 or 5 points. I think that Dalton's been smart to condense this race. I also think it's going to have a lot to do with turnout, and I would not underestimate the Obama machine to turn out a straight ticket vote. The most problematic race for us, in my view, after the governor's race, is the Newby-Irvin race for Supreme Court. That could have widespread implications, particularly on redistricting. My view is that's a toss-up right now, with a little bit of edge to Irvin because of the name ID. In regards to the congressional races, George Holding is going to be elected easily. In the 13th, I think Mark Meadows in the 11th will be elected. I think the two battlegrounds are Hudson against Kissel and McIntyre versus Hudson, which I would say McIntyre versus Rouser. I would say Rouser and McIntyre are a toss-up, and Hudson has advantage there.
Some of the polling data that we're seeing, there are several demographics that are sort of red bells, alarms for the Democrats. First, we're seeing a huge amount of crossover vote, in particular in rural North Carolina. And that's Democrats who self-identify as Democrats, but are telling pollsters that they're leaning towards voting for Romney and that they're leaning towards voting for McCrory. In some of the districts in eastern North Carolina, we've seen crossover rates as high as 20%, 21%. In southern North Carolina, Richmond, Anson, Scotland County, Stanley County, Rowan County, we're seeing crossover rates around 17%. So Democrats have really got to address that crossover vote if they're going to be competitive in the presidential race and in the gubernatorial race and the council of state races, as well as the legislative races. Another interesting demographic, the unaffiliated vote in the state is a rising demographic, fastest growing voter registration base in the state. A Over the last 4 years, we had a 9.9% increase in the number of unaffiliated voters. Out of that, 3.9% of self-identified Democrats switched over from being Democrats to being unaffiliated. 2.2% Republicans changed over from being Republicans to unaffiliated. In 2008, the unaffiliated vote was basically right at 23%. The unaffiliated vote going into November of this year could be as high as 24.5%. It could go as high as 25%. And all over, the interesting dynamic that we're seeing in the race across the state for statewide races in the presidential contest is that it's becoming a rural and urban race. The base Democratic pockets are basically in Wake, Durham, Orange, Guilford, Forsyth, Mecklenburg, and Buncombe counties. And the rest of the state, rural, is trending much more conservative, much more Republican.
Republicans in North Carolina are in, I would consider to be an excellent position, probably the best position the Republican Party has ever been in the history of North Carolina. The National Republican Party, on the other hand, has candidate recruitment problems, particularly for the U.S. Senate races. Obviously, we've been talking about the presidential race in a tough year. The fact that Mitt Romney is consistently slightly behind is really not good news for the National Republican Party. It's not bad news, it's just not good news. Whereas the state Republican Party is far in better shape than the Democrats, as Brad was getting at, in finances, in messaging, in my opinion, in candidate recruitment, and in good luck. And good luck matters in politics. So McCrory does lead Dalton. If you average all the polls by double digits, even if you threw a poll out, it would be about 10%. It will tighten, but I think it might only tighten to a 7 or 8% win. If that happens, you can expect some of the Democratic incumbent statewide office holders that Brad talked about to go down. Maybe not all of them, but several more will go down. Republicans will gain statewide. Of the 10 most competitive House seats in the United States, U.S. House seats, 3 of them are in North Carolina, and all 3 of them, I think, will go Republican. They're currently Democratic. And in the legislature, the most likely outcome, it seems to me, if you look, there's about a dozen or so state Senate races that are competitive or might be competitive. There may be 20 to 22 House seats that are competitive or might be competitive. The most likely outcome is the Republicans will maintain their rough amount of seats in the Senate, give or take 1. And I think, if anything, the Republicans may gain, because of redistricting and some other advantages, they may actually gain a couple more seats in the state House. Now, the Republicans in the state House have set as their goal, we want a veto-proof majority. Perhaps they need that against Pat McCrory, I'm not sure. But I don't think that goal is quite as critical as it might have appeared to be several months ago.